welcome. It's nice to have you here. Today is our Relax into Health, Wealth, and Happiness meeting. So I suppose maybe you know what that means. At least for those who are here live, I think you know what that means, maybe, possibly. For those who watch it on YouTube, I don't know whether they know or not because I don't know who they are. So I will give a little bit of an instruction and background so that people can get the most of it. Let me first say that the intention for this meeting is the intention of this meeting is liberation. So what does that mean? It means to notice how there is a sense of bondage, a sense of being limited. And this gives rise to all kinds of struggle and suffering. And there is a desire for liberation, whether that's consciously recognized or not, and whether there's any real understanding of what that really means. Usually there's not, but there's still nonetheless this desire for liberation. And so that's the intention, because all the other things that a person can aspire to in their life are of limited value because, and that doesn't make them wrong. They may have a relative value, and that's fine. And in fact, they may be, some of those things can be of relative benefit in regard to liberation, even. So it's all fine and good. I'm not saying that anybody should not have the desires or should not pursue their desires or any of that. That's not at all my suggestion. But I am saying that ultimately what everybody wants is liberation. And so all of the other things are at best indirect. And so here the intention is to be as direct as possible and to help point out what it is that you really want. I mean, I'm not, there's no real shortcut in the sense that you always have to figure it out for yourself. You have to look and discover within your own experience the truth, but there is a directness that's possible that can help in that regard. And so that's my intention here, is to be direct and to help point out who you are, what you want, how to achieve that. So that's the aim, that's the intention, and it's good to have proper expectations. So how does this liberation come about? Is it do I have a magic wand? Am I transmitting some sort of supernatural power? How does this come about? And no, it's neither of those. Not, at least not that I'm consciously. I don't do anything. I don't have any of those. I don't consciously have any superpowers. But there is a there is so there is one self at the highest level. I mean, obviously, at the level of differentiation, there's the appearance of many, but at the highest level, there's one. And how can we know that? Because we can each experience that directly. We can know that there is the fundamental truth of who we are, which is ever present, is formless. It's without qualities. It's without any kind of um, conditions. There's no boundary to it. It's timeless. So another way of saying the same thing is it's eternal. So, as I say, each of us can recognize that it's a possibility, and it's a really fundamental thing. So I invite you, maybe let's all just take a moment and actually explore that directly, so that we can have that as our foundation together, as a reference. So just close the eyes if it's comfortable. If it's not, you don't have to. But closing the eyes does help, or can help, because it can reduce some of the external stimulation that otherwise tends to dissipate your energy and your attention. So if you can manage it, close the eyes and just notice that who you are doesn't have any definition or limitation or boundary. So the definition and limitation and boundary all appears in thought, or as we could say, it's still thought, but we could also say association with particular kinds of experience, particular sensations that are associated with the idea of limitation or boundary or form. But actually, the most intimate sense of yourself that's very direct prior to any thought, that's always immediately present, is just simply presence. It's not a thing. There's no shape to it. Doesn't have a beginning or an end. It didn't come from anywhere. It's not going anywhere. And it's just immediately evident. So if you don't overcomplicate it, if you don't go searching for it, but you just rest, then you notice this is true. So hopefully that is evident to you, and you're welcome to open the eyes anytime now. You'd always be welcome to open the eyes, but I'm inviting you to open the eyes if you'd like, and if not, you don't need to. You can keep them closed. So this is the most essential the most essential. I don't know how to qualify that other than just to say it's the most essential. It's just clearly foundational. Everything else is dependent upon this, right? You can see that without this being, presence, awareness, consciousness, whatever you want to call it, this formless, eternal nature, there's nothing else. Everything else depends upon it. There can't be any thought if there's no awareness of the thought. There can't be any sensation if there's not awareness of the sensation. There's no form if there's not awareness of form. There's no experience without awareness of experience. So the awareness, being, this presence is the foundation. And it's independent, whereas everything else is dependent upon it. So I made the claim then that at the highest level, and that's just a sort of, when I say highest, it's just to give some kind of description to it. You know, don't take it too literally, but just, or I could say at the foundational level, there's only one. Even to say one is a bit silly, because there's not two, so there's not even properly one, because there's not, it's not a thing, there's nothing. But we have to say something about it in order to be able to speak at all. So it's all a bit imprecise and funny in that way, but we can say it's one or not two or nothing. But see, each of those is slightly misleading if we take it too seriously, because if I say it's one, then you think, oh, there's one, and then it seems like there's a limit or a form to it. If I say it's not two, then that leaves us scratching our head. What does that mean? If I say it's nothing, then we think, well, does that mean emptiness, absence? If you say presence, then it seems to suggest that it's not an emptiness or a nothingness, but then again, we're coming back around to, but what is it? So we just have to kind of be loose with the whole thing. But again, it's direct, it's intimate. It's not something that we grasp with the mind. We don't need to, because the mind is appearing in it or to it or for it or through it or however we want to understand it. But the mind is dependent upon this. So this foundational presence is not bound, it's not limited, it's not defined, there's no form to it, there's not two of it, there are not many of it. So we could say there's one, or at least not two. So that's the claim that I made, right? And I just wanted to back that up with the direct experience of it so that you can recognize that for yourself. So that it's not just more words that leave you confused, but that you can actually see the truth of it for yourself. It's very simple. So at this level, foundational level, highest level, however we want to speak of it, there's no you and me, there's simply this. And I don't actually remember why I was saying that to begin with. It doesn't really matter. But that is the foundation. So wherever I was going with that, at least we can recognize that that's the foundation, and that's the beginning and the end too. But in between, there's all this other stuff. There's all this sense of being someone with all kinds of problems and struggles and confusion, and trying to figure it out and trying to get through it and trying to just trying, a lot of trying. And this is the part where we need the help, because when we're talking about just presence, there's no need for any help, because there's no separation. There's no possibility of any problem, because a problem depends upon a sense of separation. You consider that for a moment. You can't have a problem if there's nothing else, because there's no experience, there's no relationship, there's no lack, there's no anything. So how could there be a problem? There's no possibility of a problem. But it's this in-between bit where there seems to be a problem. So we've got this foundational presence, and then we've got this appearance of all kinds of stuff. And we can understand that there's a kind of movement. So because I've said this presence is the beginning and the end, because everything arises in it and returns to it. And again, the language is a bit imprecise, because it's not really true exactly right like that. I mean, but it's sort of pointing at something that is true, because we can recognize that just in our direct experience all the time. You don't have to make it some sort of grandiose thing like the Big Bang or anything, although that's following the same basic pattern. But we can just look directly, immediately in this moment and see that every phenomenon is appearing. I had to just check if that's grammatically correct. It is correct. Yeah. Every phenomenon is appearing from this presence, and it has its apparent existence for some amount of time, and then there's a return to this presence. An undifferentiated state. So it's undifferentiated. And then there's the emergence of something appearing to be differentiated, right? Like a thought or a feeling or a memory, right? It's not there, or at least it's not there as an object of awareness. It's not differentiated. You're not aware of it as something distinct. There's just this field of undifferentiated presence, and then it emerges mysteriously, right? The thought appears, the sensation appears, and then it has its existence for apparently for some duration, whatever, however long that is, a split second or a minute or a month, lifetime, right? I mean, it's some duration. And then it, again, we could say disappears, it returns to this undifferentiated, non-differentiated state, which I'm calling presence or being, whatever we want to call it. So you just see that's what's happening. That's just the basic process that's occurring. So we have a lot of things that we get hung up on. We get very worried and concerned about a lot of things. And then, okay, I'm not pointing that out to say, shame on you or anything. I'm just pointing out that that's what happens, right? But when we try to solve those by complicated means, then we just end up with more complication. And it doesn't really actually solve anything. Like I've talked about this before. I've used this metaphor of the whack-a-mole game, which is this arcade game. May still exist. I don't know if it does or not, but it did when I was a child, and this electronic box that had these holes, and fake moles would pop up and you'd whack it. It's just what it's called, whack-a-mole. Why anybody would want to play this, I don't know. And you whack one and then another one comes up. This was the game. You just keep whacking the moles. You whack one, another one pops up. So this is sort of what most of our lives are like. We have these things just keep emerging. And so we have these moles appearing, they're appearing out of nothing. And then they return to nothing. And in between, we've got a relationship with it, apparently. I mean, there's something apparent relationship there. And that's what we're actually wanting to understand. Because at the highest level, or the most foundational level, however we want to speak of it, again, there's already liberation. There's no one to be liberated. There's already perfect, unbounded wholeness. There's no bondage at all. There's no possibility of bondage. So at that level, there's no need at all of anything. But in the moment of the appearance of the differentiation, as the mole appears out of the hole, what's the relationship? And most of us are playing whack-a-mole, right? This thing appears and we think, I've got to deal with it. And so we try to deal with it, and we've got a preconceived notion of what that dealing with it entails, what the desirable outcome should be, and how we're going to go about it. And as I've said, most of the time, for most of us, that's a relatively complicated process. And so we end up with relatively complicated results. And it does not offer us what we actually want, because what we actually want is liberation. We don't want to feel compelled, or at the very least, we don't want to believe in the compulsion to do something to deal with it in our complicated ways. You see, that's why I say I'm wanting to be very direct about what it is that we actually want, because yes, we want all these other things. And again, that's fine. You want whatever the conditional things are that you want, and that's fine. And I have my conditional desires too. Anybody who's human, probably, with very few exceptions, possibly, that's true for every human, no matter, they may be very enlightened, but still, because we're appearing here in form, there's some sense of differentiation. There's still going to be some desire for conditional things. So fine. But at the deeper level, I'm laughing just because the language is also funny. And I'm very inconsistent. Is it deeper or is it higher? What are we talking about here? I don't know. But at a deeper level, what we really want is much simpler than all of the conditional things that we want. So fine, we want the conditional things, but our tendency, because the world trains us in this way, is to keep making it more and more complicated. And so it seems to take us further and further away from the simplicity and the rest and the peace and the liberation that we really want. As an example, people say, I want a bunch of money. I know you don't want a bunch of money because you're all very elevated souls, but the rest of us want a bunch of money. But it's all a bit silly. Nobody actually wants any money because you can't really do anything with money. At least anything you could do with money be very inefficient. You could do it much better. Like you could probably take a bunch of paper currency and make it into a mattress and sleep on it, for example. But it probably would not be the most comfortable mattress. You could do it in better ways. So the money is not what we really want. But it's what we think the money will give us, right? The money is a means by which we think we're going to achieve something so that we can get what we actually want. But we've sort of we've created complications so that we're distancing ourselves from what it is that we actually want. We don't even oftentimes have clarity about what we really want because we get so caught up in the minutia of all of the things that we think we need in order to get to what we want. So we lose sight of what it is that we really want. Why do I want the money? I want the money so that I can have peace of mind, so that I can have a sense of material security or whatever, right? I mean, I want to just have confidence that I'm going to be okay, that I can have a roof over my head and food to eat and etc. So, and then at a deeper level, it's just peace. So again, the world tends to train us to complicate things. So we think I want all of these things, these conditional things. And what we really want actually is, I've been using this word liberation. It's liberation from the compulsion to indulge all of these indirect habits. It's liberation from the compulsion to go anywhere else other than here, to be at home within yourself. And actually, the funny thing is that this is so much, it's so very accessible, but we don't usually recognize it. And so I'd like to suggest how to recognize it and how to make use of this. So first of all, how to recognize that what you want is liberation, and then how to actually liberate yourself, practically speaking. So one thing that I often suggest is that you have to start where you are. And I think a big mistake that we often make is we try to start somewhere other than where we are. And so we hear this idea of liberation, then maybe we've already got some idea of what that means, for better or for worse. Or maybe we've got some judgments about it, some opinions about whether we actually want it or not. And so already we've complicated things for ourselves. But you just drop any preconceptions you have. Then let's just look at it freshly right now and just notice that if again, and if it's helpful for you to close the eyes to recognize this, then do so. But just notice that at the most foundational level, who you are is just this boundless presence already here. And that all experiences emerging from this boundless presence that you are, and it returns to this boundless presence that you are. And it's all happening now. It's not happening any other time. So you can just actually observe that. You can notice that there's just this appearance and disappearance of energy, movement of energy. And we give it different names when it has different qualities, right? So sometimes we call it a thought, sometimes we call it a feeling, and sometimes we call it a memory, and sometimes we call it an emotion, sometimes we call it a sensation. We call all these different things, but could just simplify it and just see that there's this energy moving, and that it's just this movement is happening now. So we don't have to concern ourselves with anything in the future. We don't have to try and get some permanent thing, because permanent, as we usually understand it, means something sustained forever in time, which already is a setup for distress. I feel uncomfortable just trying to imagine such a thing, because it seems like that's going to require a great deal of maintenance and management and effort and strain. But we can just drop that entirely and just recognize that it was all founded on a false notion that really presently we can observe the reality, which is that it's timeless, eternal, now, that there's all that's ever happening is now. So the liberation that we want, or that I'm suggesting we want, is now. It's not something that's going to be had in the future. So we don't need to concern ourselves with that. We don't need to try and brace ourselves to have and sustain anything in the future at all. We don't need to have any concerns about any kind of contingencies or anything. Just notice that actually the only thing that you have is now. This is, and again, the language is a bit funny because you don't have anything, but the only thing you have access to, the only thing that's real, the only thing that is available is now. And so you can let go of all any stressful notion that you've got to do anything to have anything in the future or maintain anything in the future. The liberation that we're talking about is always now. It's a good news and bad news proposition, to tell the truth, because I mean it's entirely good news, but it on a superficial level, there's a bad news, because it means that we've really got to reorganize ourselves, and because most of our organization is based on future attainment. So as I pointed out earlier, we're usually so focused on all of the means that we've lost sight of what it is that we actually want. So we think we want the money and we want the job and we want the relationship and we want the this and we want the that, but we've forgotten that all of it was really just a means to an end, and the end, we've forgotten what it even is. So we've got to let go of a lot of that stuff because that's how we've organized ourselves. And as long as we maintain that organization, then we keep this forward momentum, always losing sight of what it is that we really want. And what we really want is now. It's this liberation that's available to us now. So again, if you keep thinking, oh, but it's all fine and good that I can experience and know peace now, but what about tomorrow? What about 5 minutes from now? What about when that situation happens that I'm so concerned about? Then just see what you're doing, right? You're just causing self-harm. You're enslaving yourself presently to some notion of some future thing. But the liberation is only now, so you can choose that now. And that's when I'm talking about this reorganization, that's what I'm meaning, is that we have to really see the truth of this, and we have to establish ourselves in this truth by just continually looking now and seeing the truth of it and recognizing, gee whiz, it's true. You know, the only peace that can be had is now. The only love that can be had is now. And this is unconditional. It's not, clearly it's not a conditional thing, because there are no conditions now. Now is so slippery. There's no possibility of any condition on it. It's very sneaky. You try to put a condition on it and it will just demonstrate that you can't put that condition on it. But you can choose it now. You can accept it now. So the liberation that we really want is now. And as I said, it's good news, bad news. The bad news is only the good. The bad news is also good news, but it's just bad news in the sense that it means we've got to let go of our usual habitual organization, the way that we usually orient ourselves, because we're usually fairly future oriented. And when we let go of that, then it's just entirely good news, because it means that we're here now. And this is where the liberation is. This is where the peace is. This is where what we truly want is. The fulfillment is now. So then we notice, though, and this is, I think, an important point, that a lot of the time our preconceptions about what we want, even if we have enough insight to recognize that what we want is liberation or peace or love or truth or whatever other things, freedom, whatever we want to, what words we want to use, even if we have enough insight to recognize that, we still usually have some preconceptions about it that usually involve getting rid of something, right? So if I say liberation, then it usually, there's usually a sense that it means I'm being liberated from something, meaning usually this implication is that that thing is gotten rid of. Something has been gotten rid of, so that condition no longer appears. So if I want liberation from suffering, then I want the conditions that I've associated with suffering to go away and never appear again. So if I want liberation from anger, I want this experience that I call anger to never appear again, because I believe that the appearance of that condition is the problem. And so the liberation that I think I want is it really means getting rid of the condition. So usually, I can't say for everybody, but probably everybody, there's some sense of that what I want, even if I have the insight that what I want is freedom, liberation, peace, that it is still a conditional thing, that I've got to get rid of something before this can be had or realized or known. So then we're back playing this game of whack-a-mole, because the mole appears, which is that condition that I say I don't want, that's intolerable, insufferable, in not to be allowed. That will be some thought or feeling or circumstance, some event that occurs. And I say, well, that's if that appears, then there's bondage and suffering. And so back to the drawing board, I've got to just whack this mole and then try and figure it out again. But all that I'm doing is fooling myself when I do that, because I'm just reinforcing a habit of a relationship. So fundamentally, again, and this is observable in direct experience, so please check it out for yourself. There's this eternal presence that has no form, no definition, no limitation, no condition. And then there's this movement of energy. This is just language, so don't take it too literally, but you can just notice there is a movement of energy. What I'm talking about here, pointing to, there's some sense of a movement of energy. This movement of energy is just always happening. So there's, it's like there's the whole, and then there's the mole. The mole is appearing and disappearing, and that's just the game. That's just how it goes. That's what's happening. That's the setup. So that's just going on. But and there's no problem, you see. It's just that's what's going on. So there's awareness, and there's the appearance of things in awareness. And that's just the basic setup. That's just going on all the time. Then there's a habit of relating to this whole setup, where we say, well, I am this thing, and all of this stuff that's going on is another thing, and the stuff that's going on is affecting me as this thing, and it's either for better or for worse, and I've got to do something about it. I've got to do something to get more of what's good, and I've got to do something to get less of what's bad. But that relationship is just a habit. The whole idea of yourself and your relationship to existence is a habit. Again, to use this whack-a-mole metaphor, consider for a moment that here's just this electric box with holes and some programming so that these mechanical moles will appear, pop up out of the holes. That's it. That's all that it is. That's it. I mean, and if you step back, you can clearly see that. You can see it with neutrality, that there is it has nothing to do with anything. You don't care at all. What does it matter? It's just a box with mechanical moles popping up and down. But if you are a 5-year-old child and your family has made an outing, an event of going to this arcade, and you've put your money into it, and you've seen all the other kids doing it, and you now and you've and there's a thing that gives you a score, and you're thinking, I got to get a good score. My brother got such and such score. I've got to beat my brother because he's my brother. And that's how we do things, is I've got to beat my brother because otherwise I'll never hear the end of it, how he beat me in whack-a-mole. So now you're all caught up in the whole thing and you're taking it very seriously, and it seems you've got a relationship with it and it matters. It's very important. And the longer you do it, the more that habit is established, and it seems to be more and more real, and the bickering competitiveness between brothers and all of it seems to become very important. But if you just step back and see the whole thing with neutrality, you'll realize there's nothing here. I was just making it up. It was just a habit that I was taking to be real. So in our lives, we can also see the same thing, which is all this stuff going on. And that's just the basic setup is, and I mean, there's an incredible intelligence that's operating all of this. So I don't mean in any way to be even remotely dismissive of that. It's absolutely incredible. Because I mean, just think about how incredible it is. All of this is happening, and that this power of Maya can entrance you so that you can believe that you are this person who has to do these things in order to get what you want, so that then you'll be okay. It's incredible. I mean, it's just absolutely mind-blowing. So, in all respect to this intelligence, I mean, we don't stand a chance if we try to set ourselves above the intelligence. Forget about it. That's a terrible thing to do. You will enmesh yourself in great suffering doing that. You bow down with respect to this intelligence and align yourself with the intelligence and have reverence for this intelligence and start to understand the intelligence, communicate with the intelligence in a good way, and this will help. This will make a big difference. So I want to be clear about that. But what the intelligence is wanting is for you to wake up and recognize that you are one with this intelligence, and that it is prompting you by saying you are entranced. You're standing in front of a box and you're believing that this box is something that it is not, and you're suffering as a result of that. And so it's guiding you and it's showing you, because every time you enact this habit of relating in this particular way, you hurt. And so it's, again, what incredible, perfect intelligence when you consider that it's doing all of this, organizing all of this, so that everybody, everywhere, always is getting exactly the experience that they need in order to help them to wake up, to realize what it is that they truly want and where it is and how to discover and access that. So, but it's whispering presently to you, and it's saying, step back, see this for what it is, see who you really are, and see what you really want, and simplify rather than complicate your life. See that what you truly want is liberation, and see that this liberation is now, and let go of all the preconceptions, because your mind will argue so many things and will make it so complicated and so painful. And it can do that endlessly at each step. Even when you take the step back, then the mind will come back in and it will say, oh, but it's so unfair. And what kind of God would create a thing like this? And it does all these things, why? It asks all the wrong questions. So you have to just keep taking a step back and just question all the questions, question all the assumptions. When the mind says why, say, who cares? What good is that going to do? Why? It's the wrong question. The better question is, what can I discover right now about some habit of relating that I have to reality that is wrong, that's painful? What am I believing right now that is causing me suffering presently? And in that, there can be an instant revelation that there is peace already here. It's just all that we have to do is see the truth of it, and the spell is broken, and we recognize and wake up to the liberation now. It's that simple, actually. But again, then the habit reasserts itself, tends to reassert itself. We tend to overcomplicate things again. We're right back up at the box, whacking the moles because we think we've got to. But again, as soon as we have this experience and we say, oh, this hurts. I'm stressed out. I'm anxious. I'm fearful. I'm worried. I'm angry. I'm resentful. It's again this intelligence whispering in our ear. It's saying, step back. See what you're doing to yourself. See what you're imagining. Because this is all in your imagination. All of this is in your imagination. Not the basic setup. The basic setup is not in your imagination. The basic setup is real and true, but everything that you believe about it, that's completely in your imagination. You think that it means all of these things. You think that you are all of these things. You think you've got to do all of these things. And I think it's very, very helpful. There's a danger in what I'm about to suggest to you, but it's also very helpful. Just listen to the way that people speak, and then start to listen to the way that you speak and the way you think. But it's often easier to hear it in other people first. But the danger is then you start judging other people and you fail to actually look at yourself, which is where you need to look. But it can be easy, as I'm saying, it can be easier to recognize this in other people's, the way other people are speaking. So you can just listen, and you'll hear that people speak about things. They'll say, I have to. I need to. It has to be done. I should, or he should, or they should. These kinds of ways of thinking and thereby speaking are a big part of this trance, because then they reinforce this idea of this particular kind of relating that's all obviously conditional, right? Because you have to do something, or you should do something, because that's to meet a particular condition, and you're supposed to meet that condition to achieve okayness. You have to do the dishes. because fill in the blank. Now, I'm not saying don't do the dishes. I'm not saying do the dishes. You do the dishes, don't do the dishes. But this idea I have to or I should is a way of relating that's in your imagination that's totally you're enslaving yourself, and it's totally false. It's just a false notion. And when you believe that, then you can just see what the consequences are. You feel bad, resentful, angry, whatever, overwhelmed, depressed, just over dishes. I mean, think about, and when you see that, maybe it's easier with something like dishes to start with the easier things, but just start to notice how you think about things and then question that and see. It's like taking a step back and you realize, wait a second, what's really going on here? And again, it can be helpful. Just close the eyes, relax, notice what's really going on. I mean, at the most basic level, there's just breathing. I mean, maybe even more basic than that. We can say there's even more basic than that. We call that prana or energy or chi, but very accessible all the time usually is just to notice the breathing, which is kind of a gross manifestation of that basic energy. And you can just notice this is what's going on. Actually, there's just this going on, just the breath happening. And then there's all kinds of beliefs and commentaries and expectations and all of this, but that's all just this habit of relationship to this whack-a-mole. It's just breathing, just energy. And then you can notice all of the beliefs, the thoughts that are there, and just question them. Just see, is that true? I have to? It's not true. I don't have to anything. It's just in my imagination. And when I'm imagining that, what's the outcome? Well, I feel bad. I act badly, complicate my life. So what I'm proposing, as usual, with a lot of words, but it's very simple, is just to see that what you really want is had only now, and it's not conditional, and that you can choose that. You just pause, slow down internally, just notice the basic foundation: awareness, energy. And that's always happening. If you're believing that that should not be happening, you're fighting with reality. I mean, what kind of outcome are you going to get? What you're going to get: suffering. So instead of saying the energy shouldn't be happening, which is a huge waste of time, just take a look and see, what am I believing? Because the basic setup, again, is just awareness, energy. Everything else I'm adding to it in my imagination with my beliefs, with my thoughts. And that might be hard to believe. I even find that hard to believe sometimes. But it is always true. I've never found it not to be true. It's just absolutely mind-blowing, but it's true. And it's such a simplification. Whatever the problem is. And so, and it's so completely unconditional that there's nothing that can that can interfere with this as true. So that even if I've convinced myself that I've gotten all worked up, and I say, oh, well, now I've really done it. I'm all stressed out and I've really failed and I'll never get out of this one, or at least it's going to take a long time. At least it's going to be hours before I can be calm again because I've gotten myself so stressed out and I've acted like an ass and I've caused all kinds of problems for myself, complicated all my relationships, and it's just going to be bad for a long time as a result of all this. Even if that's the case, even if I've found myself destitute, living under a bridge, whatever fortunately, I've not found that to be true, but whatever the situation might be, no matter how bad I might convince myself that it is and how I've really done it now, if I just stop now and tell the truth, it always comes right down to this: awareness and energy. And I've been believing a bunch of stupid stuff. And it's just awareness and energy. And there's peace now. And then the mind will come in and it'll say, yeah, but what about this thing that might happen? What about this pain that might occur in the next second? What if it's unbearable? What if? It's like, okay, yeah, great. But guess what that actually is? Awareness and energy. Awareness and energy. Awareness and energy. And that's the liberation. So it's very available. It's just a matter of choice. So just to recap, whatever it is, whatever is going on, no matter how good or bad you think your life is in this moment, no matter how you think you're really on a good trajectory or you're really on a bad trajectory, in this moment, if you notice that you're suffering, if you notice that you are feeling that you're in bondage, give thanks, because this intelligence, this divine intelligence, is whispering in your ear to wake you up. And I think about what an act of unconditional love that is. You might do all kinds of stupid stuff. Maybe not you. I might do all kinds of stupid stuff. And blessedly, this intelligence will whisper in my ear and it will say, just let go. And I'll say, but I gotta get myself even more worked up and complicate things even more so I can solve my problems. And I'm saying, just let go. And lo and behold, it's true. So you just let go, just notice it's just awareness and energy. And you've been believing all kinds of unhelpful things, but you don't have to do that right now. And so right now, in this moment, is liberation. And this is eternal liberation. Doesn't mean that you won't find yourself in bondage in the next second, but the next second is outside of eternity. That's your choice to go back into time if you want. But at any moment, you can, again, stop and just find yourself, again, in eternal liberation, because it's always now. This always now is the eternal liberation. And it's unconditional. You don't have to be a saint. You don't have to be very intelligent. You don't have to be anything in particular. All that's required is just your willingness, just to surrender. So, very simple message, takes an hour to deliver. Thank you very much for your patience. I hope that you have found this to be valuable. And that's it from me today. For those who are here live, I'm happy to stay on for Q&A. I can't imagine there will be anything, but if there is, I'm happy to stay on. So let me end this recording now.